When I was asked to give this talk about sacred time and sacred space, it was right in the middle of a CMS visit. And I hate to admit it, but I had to stop and think, can sacred anything and CMS visit coexist? At times I felt they couldn't. When we're stressed, anxious, irritated, and even fearful, how can that coexist with serenity, peace, and calm? I know it can if our heart and mind are focused on God and His strength and comfort in the midst of turmoil or a dark time in our lives. But that isn't always our first response. At least it isn't mine. I was reminded of a time several years ago when I went hiking with friends in Yosemite. It was a typical long weekend trying to pack everything possible into a few short days. We left home a bit later than expected, so we got up to the beginning of the hiking trail fairly late in the day. It was spring and the wildflowers were blooming and beyond beautiful. The hills seemed an almost fluorescent green and the piercing blue sky was so gorgeous. But there was no time to enjoy the beauty. We had to hurry. It didn't seem like there was even time to stop to drink water, so we just put our head down and on we went. As we finally reached our campsite at nightfall, we hurried and set up our tents and decided that we would just take our food sacks and put them up on top of a tree on a branch and throw them over that instead of using the pole that the campsite provided for us. I wasn't feeling well, so I decided to crawl in my sleeping bag and try to go to sleep. And about an hour, hour and a half later, there were these clanging of pots and pans and people yelling, "Jill, Jill, get up, the bears are here." Well, I still wasn't feeling well, and I really could have cared less if the bears were here or there or wherever they were. But I decided with great insistence from everybody to poke my head outside of the tent. And sure enough, as I peered out of the tent, there was a huge mama bear sitting there with a Country Time lemonade container, licking every last bit that she could have gotten out of that container. At the same time, I was looking around the campsite to see what had happened, and it was an absolute mess. She had obviously been there for a little while. But then what I heard in the tree, it sounded like a lamb. And I thought, well, I know I'm sick, but I don't think I'm delirious. And so I looked up into that tree, and there were two baby cubs clear up the tree and out on the limb. Hearing us, they were fearful, so they sounded like little lambs. But they had skillfully crawled out onto that limb and had cut the bottom of each sack out so the food would drop. I figured they're much smarter than we are. So the food would drop on the ground so Mama Bear and the babies could take whatever they wanted. Well, we knew we had a couple more days to hike, and we certainly needed our food. And so we got some pots and pans again together, hoping that they were good bears and would run off when we clanged them together. And sure enough, they did. It was very different from a sacred time and a sacred space, that's for sure. I was in the middle of what many people call God's country, and with its beauty, its magnificence, and its grandeur, yet the circumstance to have to hurry, to not be feeling well, to have those bears rob us of everything. It certainly wasn't the circumstance that I thought was ideal. And then I thought that this was certainly a parallel to what we live in our everyday lives. I feel like we're running so fast sometimes we almost can't even catch ourselves. We can't or don't stop to refuel or smell the roses, or in my case, the wildflowers. There's pressure of climbing the mountain, whatever that may represent in your life. And then there are circumstances that rob us of our joy and our peace. The sacred time and sacred space isn't always that quiet time we set aside, which of course is extremely important. But I believe it's also that place we can go in the midst of our busy lives, in the midst of stress, like a CMS visit, pain, heartache, or fear of uncertainty. It doesn't have to be an either-or. In Philippians, Paul talks about the peace that is beyond our comprehension, and living in that peace is where we don't have to feel anxious or fearful, even in the midst of a storm. He also, in that same chapter, talks about be anxious for nothing, but talk to God. Talk about what's on your heart. So I hope that we'll remember to take time to talk to Him, and that no matter what, whatever mountain we're climbing or seems to be in our way, we will have peace. Creating that sacred time and sacred space for ourselves in our everyday life and even during a CMS survey.